Billionaire lost his memory. The only person who knew him was a waitress. The storm that night had swallowed the coast. By morning, the world smelled like salt and iron. The rescue team found the wreck of a car upside down in the dunes, its metal body half buried by the tide. Inside, a man was alive, breathing but broken. His ID said Alexander Vale, a name that made the paramedic pause. Billionaire, CEO, the kind of man who owned headlines, not bruises. But when he woke in the hospital 2 days later, he didn't even know his own name. Subscribe if you believe that love still changes people. Alexander's world restarted in fragments, flashes of light. Voices he didn't recognize. A sterile room where everyone spoke to him like he was valuable property instead of a man. Doctors came and went saying words like amnesia, trauma, temporary. But the truth was he felt nothing temporary about it. His reflection in the mirror was a stranger's, clean-cut, flawless but hollow-eyed. And the people who came to see him, the lawyer, the assistant, the woman who called herself his fiancée, were colder than the rain outside. She entered his life quietly, like sunlight through a crack in a wall. Her name was Clara Reed, a waitress from the hospital cafe downstairs. She wasn't supposed to be there that night, but the nurse who brought his food had been called away, and Clara, kind-hearted, with a habit of helping where she shouldn't, decided to deliver it herself. When she stepped into his room, Alexander was sitting by the window, staring at the storm like he was waiting for it to tell him who he was. "You look like someone who needs coffee," she said gently. He turned. "Do I?" "You look like someone who's forgotten what warmth tastes like." It was the first time since the accident that he smiled. Their first conversation lasted 5 minutes, their second an hour. By the end of the week, she was bringing his breakfast on purpose. The nurses didn't stop her. Everyone liked Clara. She had a rare kind of empathy that didn't ask for permission. It just existed. Unashamedly human. He told her the doctor said his mind would recover piece by piece, that he'd remember faces, names, perhaps even the life he'd led before. But every time the woman claiming to be his fiancée came, his chest tightened. Her beauty was cold and expensive, her words rehearsed, her pity hollow. "You'll come home soon, Alex," she'd whisper. "You'll be you again." He wasn't sure he wanted to be. Clara didn't talk to him like everyone else did. She didn't use his last name, didn't flinch at his silence. She asked simple things. "Do you sleep well? Do you like music? What do you dream about?" Questions that felt like they belonged to a life he could start over, not one he'd lost. One afternoon, she brought a chessboard to his room. "They say people remember skills before faces," she said. "Maybe your hands remember how to win," he chuckled. "You're assuming I was good at this." "You look competitive," she replied with a grin. He was, she was right. His hands moved like instinct. The game came back to him smooth and silent. But when he looked up from the board, what surprised him wasn't his victory. It was how alive he felt. Clara laughed, and the sound filled the sterile room like something sacred. Over the next weeks, she became the only person he trusted. He'd tell her about the gaps in his memory, the flashes of boardrooms, flashes of anger, flashes of himself in places that felt cold and lonely. She'd listen, her eyes soft but steady, never trying to fix him. One evening he asked, "What do you think I was like?" Clara hesitated. "You want the truth?" "Please." "You were probably the kind of man who thought you had everything," she said. "But somewhere along the way you forgot how to be happy." Her honesty hit harder than the truth ever could. Outside, the winter pressed harder against the glass. But inside, something warmer grew between them. Quiet, undeniable, forbidden. He was still a billionaire, even without his memory. She was still a waitress making minimum wage and caring for her sick mother in a rented apartment. But for an hour each day, none of that mattered, until the day his world came looking for him. A man arrived at the hospital in a tailored suit, surrounded by security. "Mr. Vale," he said with a practiced smile. "I'm Daniel, your business partner." Alexander blinked. The word business felt foreign. Daniel handed him a tablet showing photos, board meetings, luxury homes, press conferences. A version of Alexander Vale that looked powerful, ruthless, untouchable. "You're needed back," Daniel said. "Your company's in crisis. Your memory may be foggy, but the empire doesn't stop." Clara, standing by the door, lowered her gaze. For the first time, she looked like she didn't belong in the same room as him. That night, he couldn't sleep. The rain returned, beating against the window like it was trying to remind him of something he didn't want to remember. When he closed his eyes, he saw flashes: his old office, a contract, a woman crying, and behind it all a voice that sounded like his own, saying things he couldn't bear to hear. The next morning, Daniel returned. "We're taking you home, Alex. Your life is waiting." Alexander looked at Clara. She smiled faintly, trying to hide the ache in her eyes. "You should go," she said softly. "Find out who you were." He reached for her hand. "You're the only person who doesn't treat me like a ghost. And maybe that's why you have to go," she whispered. He didn't know it yet, but the world he was about to step back into would make him wish he'd never remembered a thing. When he turned to say goodbye, she was already gone. The mansion looked like something out of a dream he didn't remember. Marble floors, glass walls, a garden designed like a museum of silence. Everything about it screamed wealth, but to Alexander it felt like entering someone else's life. The staff bowed as he walked through the door, their eyes uncertain, as if they were waiting for him to turn back into the man he used to be. "Welcome home." "Sir?" said a woman with perfect posture and colder eyes than the winter outside. She was the fiancée, Victoria Langford. Her voice carried the smoothness of money, every word carefully measured. He nodded, polite but distant. "I suppose this is home," she smiled faintly. "It will come back to you, I promise." But her promise felt like a contract, not comfort. He spent days walking through rooms that meant nothing to him, offices full of awards with his name engraved, photos of him shaking hands with world leaders, a bedroom with sheets that smelled expensive but not familiar. The world called him a genius, a visionary, the billionaire who could turn anything into profit. But the man in the mirror looked exhausted. One morning, Victoria found him standing by the window, watching the gardeners work. "You should rest," she said. "I've been resting for weeks," he replied. "And I still don't feel alive." She frowned slightly. "You're lucky to be alive at all, Alexander. You have responsibilities. Shareholders, employees, the board. People are worried about the company." He looked at her, searching for warmth. "Is anyone worried about me?" Her silence answered. Later that evening, Daniel came with more papers, numbers, reports, reminders of the empire that was waiting for its king to return. "We've lost key investors," Daniel explained. "Your absence has shaken confidence. We need your name on a few statements to stabilize things." "My name," Alexander repeated softly, "means more than I do." Daniel hesitated. "For now, yes." That night he walked outside into the cold garden, rain threatening again. Every path led to another part of his wealth, but none led to peace. He remembered Clara's words. "You were probably the kind of man who thought you had everything." He missed her voice, the simplicity of it, the way she talked to him like he was human. The next morning he left without telling anyone. He took a car from the garage, not knowing where to go until he found himself driving toward the hospital. When he arrived, the receptionist recognized him immediately. "Mr. Vale, it's good to see you again," she said. "Clara," he said, ignoring the formalities. "Is she here?" The receptionist hesitated. "She left last week. Her mother's condition got worse. I think she went back to her hometown, Millbridge." Millbridge. He didn't know the place, but his chest tightened at the sound of it. The drive took hours. The further he went, the less the world looked like his own. The buildings gave way to fields, the cars to quiet roads. When he arrived, the sun was setting behind a line of small houses that looked older than time. He found her in a diner at the edge of town, wearing an apron, her hair tied back, moving between tables with the same grace he remembered. When she saw him standing there, her eyes widened in disbelief. "Alexander?" He almost didn't answer. "You said to find out who I was," he said quietly. "I did. And I don't like him." She took a step closer, searching his face. "You came all this way to tell me that?" "I came because you're the only person who ever saw me as more than a headline." The diner was nearly empty, the hum of an old radio filling the space between them. She gestured for him to sit. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. "People like you don't belong in places like this." He looked around. "Maybe that's why I can breathe here." She studied him for a long moment. "Your fiancée must be worried." "She doesn't love me," he said simply. "She loves what I am. And what are you now?" He smiled faintly. A man trying to remember what love feels like. The words hung between them, fragile and real. For the first time since the accident, Clara saw the truth in his eyes. He wasn't just lost in memory. He was lost in meaning. Over the next few days he stayed in town, claiming he needed air, quiet, space. But he was really there for her. He'd come to the diner each morning, sitting at the corner booth as she served him coffee. They talked about ordinary things, books, childhood, her mother's health. It was the kind of life he'd never known existed. One night when the diner closed, he walked her home under a sky full of rain. "You're not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect? A man who'd come back to reclaim his throne. Instead, you look like someone who's afraid of it." He stopped walking. "Maybe I am." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged, alive. The rain began to fall harder, but neither moved. She looked up at him, her hair damp, her eyes bright with something she couldn't name. He wanted to say it, to tell her that she was the only thing that made him feel human again, but before he could, headlights flashed from the corner. A black car pulled up beside them. Daniel stepped out holding an umbrella. "Alexander," he said, voice sharp. "We need to talk." Alexander's jaw tightened. "How did you find me?" "You're the CEO of a billion-dollar company," Daniel replied. "You don't disappear without consequences." He glanced at Clara, his tone colder. "And you definitely don't get involved with waitresses." Alexander's eyes darkened. "Be careful how you talk about her." Daniel sighed, lowering his voice. "You've been gone for weeks. The board is panicking. Your fiancé is furious. Come back before everything collapses." Clara's hand trembled slightly. "You should go," she whispered. "Oh, you can't lose everything because of me." He turned to her. "If everything I built can't survive me being human, then maybe it deserves to fall." Daniel took a step closer. "You don't mean that." But Alexander did. For the first time, he meant every word. Rain dripped from his hair as he looked at Clara, really looked, and knew that whatever he decided next would change both of their lives forever. The next morning, the city papers exploded with headlines about the missing billionaire who had been found living quietly in a small town with a waitress. It was gossip painted as scandal, and before noon, Millbridge became a storm of curiosity. Photographers parked outside the diner. Customers came not for coffee but to stare, and Clara felt the air grow heavy with whispers she didn't deserve. Alexander saw it in her eyes, the unease, the guilt of being dragged into a world she never wanted. He tried to shield her, but the world had long claws. When a journalist shouted a question about their relationship, he grabbed Clara's hand and led her away, his voice low and firm. "You don't owe anyone an explanation." They walked down the street in silence. The weight of what he'd done, of bringing his chaos into her quiet life, hung between them. Finally, Clara stopped. "Alexander," she said softly, "you can't fight a world like yours with anger. It only eats you alive." He looked at her, his expression raw. "Then teach me another way." That night, he rented a small room in town instead of returning to the mansion. He insisted on helping at the diner, washing dishes, sweeping floors, learning how to live without assistants and boardrooms. The regulars found it amusing at first, but there was something disarming about seeing the billionaire carry plates and ask for tips on folding napkins. Clara watched him slowly dissolve the layers of who he'd been. He smiled differently now, not with confidence, but with sincerity. He listened more than he spoke. And sometimes, when their hands brushed while passing coffee cups, she'd feel a current that had nothing to do with power or pity. Days turned into weeks. His memory returned in pieces, fragments of deals, names, faces, boardrooms, but not emotions. It was as if his mind remembered the man, but his heart refused to. One evening after closing, they sat outside on the diner steps. Fireflies blinked across the fields, and the summer air carried a warmth that made silence feel safe. "I remembered something today," he said quietly. "What was it?" she asked. "My father. The day he told me that weakness was the one sin a veil could never afford." He paused, his voice low. "I think I built an empire just to prove him wrong. But I didn't prove anything. I just became what he wanted." Cold. Clara turned to him. "You can't change what you were taught, but you can choose what you believe now." He looked at her, really looked, and something shifted inside him. "And what do you believe, Clara?" "That strength doesn't come from walls," she said. "It comes from people who let others in." Before he could answer, headlights swept over them again. This time it wasn't Daniel. It was Victoria. She stepped out of a sleek black car, her heels striking the pavement like a verdict. "Alexander," she said, her tone dripping with practiced calm. You've made quite the spectacle." He stood slowly, shoulders straight. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here because the board sent me," she replied, glancing at Clara with disdain. "You can't keep running from your life. This little escape fantasy ends now." Clara's hands tightened around the edge of the step. Victoria's beauty was intimidating, polished, flawless like glass. But behind her perfection was contempt. "You don't know him anymore," Clara said softly. Victoria turned, her eyes narrowing. "And you do?" "I think I do," Clara said. "Because I don't want anything from him." Victoria laughed in a sharp, elegant sound. "Everyone wants something from Alexander Vale." Alexander stepped between them. "Enough, I'm not going back." Victoria blinked. "You've lost your mind." "Maybe I've found it," he said, her voice softened, dangerous in its sweetness. "You think she understands you? She'll never survive your world, Alexander. She doesn't belong there, and you don't belong here." Clara stood facing her with quiet dignity. "Maybe belonging isn't about money. Maybe it's about peace." Victoria's eyes flicked toward Alexander. "You'll regret this," she said coldly before turning to leave. The car's taillights disappeared into the dark, leaving the sound of crickets and the heavy pulse of rain beginning to fall. Alexander sat back down beside Clara, running a hand through his hair. "She's right about one thing," he murmured. "I don't belong anywhere." Clara looked at him, her expression soft but steady. "Then start building a place where you do." The rain fell harder, soaking through their clothes, but neither of them moved. He reached for her hand, hesitating just long enough for her to know it wasn't impulse. It was surrender. When their fingers finally intertwined, he whispered, "You were the only person who saw me when I didn't even see myself." She smiled faintly. "Then don't lose that again." For the first time, the storm didn't feel like punishment. It felt like baptism, a washing away of everything false. But inside the diner, unseen by them, a figure was watching through the window. Daniel. His phone glowed as he typed a message to Victoria. "You were right. He's not coming back willingly. We'll have to make him." The next morning began with sunlight spilling over the quiet streets of Millbridge, but the peace was deceptive. While Clara brewed the first pot of coffee at the diner, Alexander sat at the corner booth, reading a newspaper that screamed his name across the front page. "Billionaire refuses to return. Corporate empire in crisis." He folded the paper in silence. Every word felt like a chain trying to pull him back into a world that didn't fit anymore. Clara approached with 2 cups of coffee. "You shouldn't read those," she said gently. "I need to know how far they'll go," he murmured. She sat across from him, her apron still dusted with flour. "You don't owe the world an explanation for trying to be human." He smiled faintly. "You always make it sound so simple." "That's because it is," she replied. "You just lived too long in a place that made it complicated." Before he could answer, a familiar voice cut through the air. "Alexander." Daniel stood in the doorway, his suit immaculate, his eyes sharp with purpose. Behind him, 2 men in dark coats waited by the car. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The regular customers looked up, sensing trouble, but Clara stayed seated, unsteady, unflinching. "May I sit?" Daniel asked, already pulling out a chair. Alexander didn't object. "I assume this isn't a friendly visit." Daniel leaned forward. "Victoria's losing control of the board. They've voted to suspend your authority if you don't return immediately." Alexander met his gaze. "Let them." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You built that company with your own hands." "I built a machine that runs on fear," he said. "And it's eating everyone alive, including me." Daniel's tone softened, but his eyes stayed cold. "You don't get to just walk away. Too many people depend on you. If you won't do it for yourself, do it for them." Clara placed her hand on the table, calm but firm. "He's not a machine, Daniel. He's a person." Daniel turned to her, voice laced with quiet disdain. "You think you understand him because he smiles at you over coffee. You have no idea what kind of man he really is." "I know enough," she said. Alexander stood slowly. "Daniel, I'm not coming back." "Not now." Daniel sighed, almost regretful. "Then you leave me no choice." He nodded toward the men by the door. Before Clara could react, they approached Alexander, not violently, but with authority, as if escorting him was an obligation, not a threat. "Don't make this harder," Daniel said. "You need medical care. You're not thinking clearly." Clara stepped in front of them. "He's not sick. He's healing. The taller man hesitated, unsure. "Ma'am, please," but Alexander's voice cut through. "Stop." His tone carried the weight of command, the kind that had built empires. The men froze. He looked at Daniel, disappointment flashing in his eyes. "You used to believe in me." Daniel's composure cracked for a moment. "I still do. But not in this version of you." And with that he turned and left, his car tires slicing through the gravel outside. Clara exhaled shakily. The tension in the room slowly dissolved as the door closed behind him. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. Alexander nodded, though his hands trembled slightly. "He's not my enemy. He just can't imagine life without control." That evening, Clara found him outside again, standing near the edge of the field behind the diner. The sun was setting in streaks of gold and amber, and the wind carried the scent of rain. "I used to think power was freedom," he said quietly. "But now that I've let go of it, I'm terrified. What if I don't know how to live without it?" Clara stepped closer. "Then you learn. Like anyone else. One honest day at a time." He turned to her, eyes glimmering in the fading light. "You make it sound possible." "It is," she said. "You just have to want peace more than control." For a long moment, neither spoke. The air was soft between them, full of things that didn't need words. But as the wind shifted, Clara saw movement near the tree line, the faint silhouette of a man with a camera. The flash came an instant later. "Alexander," she whispered. "They're watching us." He turned too late, another flash, another angle. Journalists had found them again. Without thinking, he grabbed her hand. "Come on." They ran through the field as the sky opened in a sudden downpour. The rain came heavy, soaking them in seconds, but they didn't stop until they reached the road beyond the diner. Breathless, drenched, laughing at the absurdity of it all. Clara looked at him, water streaming down her face. "They'll twist everything, won't they?" He nodded. "They always do." "Then let them," she said. "You can't control what the world says. You can only decide what you live for." Her words hit him harder than the rain. He realized he was still holding her hand, tightly, as if afraid that letting go would mean losing the last piece of truth he had. Lightning flashed behind them, turning the world momentarily white. For a heartbeat, the noise, the cameras, the past, everything disappeared. There was only her. Then the roar of an approaching car shattered the moment. Headlights blazed through the rain, and before either could move, the car swerved violently toward the roadside. The sound of metal against stone filled the air. Clara gasped. "Alexander," but he was already running toward it, unaware that inside that black car was a face he thought he'd never see again. The car door swung open with a screech. Through the rain and smoke, Victoria stumbled out, pale and trembling, her hair disheveled, the glow of her phone still flickering in her hand. The rain poured down her face as she looked up and saw Alexander running toward her. He reached her first, his voice sharp with concern. "Victoria, are you hurt?" She caught her breath, eyes wide, voice breaking. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to talk." Behind him, Clara stood frozen, the rain soaking her uniform, unsure whether to move closer or stay away. Everything about the moment felt like a collision of two worlds that should never have met. "Let's get her inside," Clara said softly. Alexander helped Victoria to her feet, and together they brought her back to the diner. The last customers had already left. The lights were low, the sound of rain echoing through the empty space as Clara fetched a towel and warm coffee. Victoria sat in silence, staring at the steam rising from her cup. "You must think I'm pathetic," she whispered. Alexander shook his head. "I think you're scared," she gave a brittle laugh. "Scared? Maybe. I've spent years building a life where nothing could touch me. Not people, not pain, not loss. And then you vanish. The board blames me. The press humiliates me. You ruined everything." Clara quietly set a blanket over her shoulders. "Maybe it wasn't ruined. Maybe it just stopped being perfect." Victoria looked up sharply. "And you would know about perfection, Waitress?" Clara met her gaze, calm but unflinching. "I know what honesty looks like. It's rarely perfect." Alexander's voice broke the tension. "Victoria, I didn't leave to hurt you." "Then why did you?" she demanded. "You could have had everything," he exhaled slowly. "Because everything meant nothing when I couldn't feel anything." Her eyes softened, the anger faltering. "You were supposed to marry me." "I was supposed to be someone else," he replied. For a long moment, the only sound was rain against glass. Then Victoria stood, wrapping the blanket tighter around her. "You think she understands you," she said, glancing toward Clara. "But she doesn't know what it's like to hold a life built on your shoulders." Clara didn't respond. She didn't need to. Victoria's expression cracked for just a moment, a flicker of grief beneath the armor. "You're making a mistake," she whispered, before turning and walking out into the rain. When the door closed, Clara looked at Alexander. "She's in pain, I know," he said, "but I can't heal her without breaking myself." The lights flickered from the storm outside. For the first time, Clara noticed the fatigue etched into his face. He wasn't a billionaire tonight, just a man caught between what he was and what he wanted to become. "Stay here," she said gently. "I'll close up." He nodded, watching her move through the diner, the way she cleaned each table, the quiet rhythm of someone who'd learned to build peace in small moments. He thought about how different she was from everyone he'd known. No pretense, no performance, just truth. When she finally joined him, the rain had softened to a whisper. They sat across from each other in the dim light. "You know," she said, "you talk about your world like it's a prison, but maybe it's just a test, to see if you can keep your soul inside it." He smiled faintly. "And what if I fail? Then you start over," she said. "Here, anywhere." He leaned back, studying her face. "You really believe I could live without all of that?" "I think you already are," she said softly. Outside, lightning traced the horizon. The power flickered once, twice, then went out completely. The diner fell into darkness. They froze, two silhouettes in the faint glow from the streetlights outside. "I'll get the candles," Clara said, moving toward the counter. But as she reached for the drawer, a sudden crash sounded outside. Alexander stood immediately. "Stay here." He stepped out into the rain, scanning the parking lot. A shadow moved near the edge, tall, deliberate. The beam of a flashlight cut through the dark, landing briefly on the license plate of a black SUV. He recognized it instantly. "Daniel! Daniel!" He called out over the rain. "What are you doing?" Daniel turned, his coat glistening in the downpour. "Making sure you don't destroy everything we built." Alexander took a step forward. "This isn't your fight anymore." "Yes, it is," Daniel said, "because when you fall, I fall. And I'm not letting that happen because of her." The way he said her, sharp, contemptuous, lit a fire in Alexander's chest. "Don't talk about her that way." Daniel laughed bitterly. "You've really lost it. You think she loves you, she pities you. You're a broken story she gets to fix for free." The rain hammered harder, thunder rolling overhead. Alexander stepped closer, his voice low. "You don't know her." "I know what happens when men like us believe in fairy tales," Daniel said. "We lose everything." Before Alexander could answer, Clara appeared in the doorway, her voice trembling but clear. "You don't have to protect me." Daniel turned to her, eyes narrowing. "You think you've changed him, but he'll go back to who he was. Men like him always do." Alexander moved between them. "Leave her out of this." Daniel's expression hardened. "Then prove it. Come back. Sign the papers. Save your company." Alexander's voice cracked. "And lose myself again?" Daniel didn't answer. He just turned and walked toward the SUV. "If you won't come back willingly," he said over his shoulder, "the board will make you. And this time, not even your waitress will save you." The SUV's headlights cut through the rain as it sped away, leaving mud splattered across the street. Clara stepped closer, her hand brushing Alexander's arm. What did he mean? Alexander stared into the dark, jaw tight. "It means they're not done with me yet." He turned toward her, the reflection of lightning in his eyes. "And if they come for me again, they'll come for you too." The rain didn't stop for 2 days. Millbridge seemed to sink into silence, the kind that felt heavy, like the calm before a storm that no one could see but everyone could feel. The diner stayed half empty, customers whispering about the cameras that had appeared last week, the men in suits, the expensive cars that didn't belong to a town like theirs. Clara tried to keep things normal. She smiled for the regulars, poured coffee, wiped counters, and pretended her hands weren't trembling every time a black car drove by the window. But when she looked at Alexander, she saw the change. He wasn't restless anymore. He was watchful, quietly preparing for something. That night, as she locked the front door, she saw him sitting alone in the corner booth, the same spot where he'd first walked in weeks ago. Only now his expression was sharper, heavier. "Still here?" she asked softly. I'm thinking, he said, his voice low, about how much I can lose and how little it means if I don't protect what matters. She crossed her arms, leaning against the counter. You can't live thinking about losing everything. You'll never move. He looked at her then, really looked, and there was something raw in his eyes. You don't understand. These people, they don't let go. My father built a legacy on fear. I inherited that. Daniel, Victoria, the board, they're not fighting for me. They're fighting to keep the machine alive. Then let it die, she said quietly. He hesitated as if the idea itself was too radical to process. You don't kill something that big without consequence. Maybe not, she said, walking toward him. But if you keep living for it, you'll never live at all. He smiled faintly, sad, grateful. You always say the right thing. I just say what's true. Their silence lingered until the hum of the refrigerator and the patter of rain became the only sounds in the room. She turned off the lights one by one until only the golden glow of the street lamp outside painted their faces. Come with me, he said suddenly. She blinked. What? I'm leaving tonight, he said, not running and leaving. There's a difference. Alexander, you can't just disappear again. He stood, his presence commanding even in the quiet of the small diner. They're going to take everything. My name, my money, maybe even my freedom. But they can't take me if they can't find me. And I don't want to face whatever comes next without knowing I tried to live differently. Her breath caught. You mean, come with me. Wherever we end up. Somewhere no one knows me. No business, no headlines, no past. Just us, Clara's heart raced. She wanted to say yes. Every part of her wanted to say yes. But she thought of her mother, the hospital bills, the town that depended on her small kindnesses. She thought of how temporary this might be. A dream built on borrowed time. I can't, she whispered. He looked at her for a long time, then nodded. I understand. But when he turned to leave, her voice stopped him. Alexander, he paused, raincoat half on. You don't need to disappear to change. You just need to stop running from who you are. His eyes softened. And who am I, Clara? She stepped closer, her hand brushing his chest. You're a man who's finally learning how to love. The door creaked as the wind pushed against it. He looked at her, truly looked, and for a moment it felt like time itself waited. Then slowly he leaned forward and kissed her. It wasn't perfect or planned. It was desperate and honest, filled with everything they'd both been afraid to say. When they pulled apart, she stayed close enough to feel his breath. You should go, she whispered. He nodded, tracing her cheek with his thumb. I'll come back. But as soon as the door shut behind him, the silence that filled the room felt like a warning. Hours later, the news broke. Alexander Vale indicted on charges of corporate fraud and tax evasion. Clara's phone buzzed relentlessly with messages she didn't want to read. Strangers asking if she really knew him. Reporters wanting statements. Co-workers whispering that maybe she'd been part of it. By morning, the diner was surrounded again. Cameras, questions, chaos, and Alexander was gone. She waited for days, checking the road, the news, the sound of every car that passed. But there was nothing. No word, no letter. Only headlines that grew darker by the day. Until one night, when the diner was closing, she saw something on the counter that hadn't been there before. A sealed envelope. Her name written in his handwriting. Inside was a single photograph, the two of them laughing outside in the rain. Taken by one of those reporters weeks ago. And a note. If they erase everything I was, at least they'll never erase who I became with you. Clara held the note against her chest, tears falling silently. But as she turned off the lights, the phone on the counter began to ring. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered, a pause. Then a voice, weak, distant, but unmistakable. Clara, her knees nearly gave out. Alexander. Where are you? The line crackled. Rain in the background and the sound of traffic. I don't have much time, he said. They're coming for everything, but I have something they don't. What do you mean? He hesitated, his voice breaking. Proof. About the company. About who's really behind all this. Daniel, static swallowed his words. Alexander. She shouted. The line went dead, and outside, headlights swept across the windows and slowing, stopping and right in front of the diner. The headlights stayed still for a moment, cutting through the darkness like two unblinking eyes. Clara froze by the counter, gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles went white. The rain hadn't started yet, but the smell of it was already in the air, that metallic scent that warned of something coming. Then the car door opened. A figure stepped out, tall and familiar. Daniel. He entered the diner without knocking, his coat soaked from the drive. "Evening, Clara." Her pulse raced. "What do you want?" "To talk," he said, calm, too calm. "For you've been expecting someone else, I assume." She didn't answer. He smiled faintly. "He called you, didn't he?" Her stomach turned. "If you're here to threaten me, threaten," he interrupted, his tone almost amused. "No, Clara, I came to offer you protection." She frowned. "From what?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "From the man who's about to destroy everything you care about." She stared at him. "You're lying." "I wish I were." Daniel placed a folded document on the counter. "Do you know what this is?" A sworn statement. From a journalist who claims Alexander bribed him to bury stories about fraud and embezzlement. Evidence. Signed, dated. Clara pushed it back toward him. "I don't need to see that." "You should," he said. "Because when the authorities come, and they will, they won't care about love stories or second chances. They'll come for anyone who helped him." Her chest tightened. "I haven't done anything." He tilted his head. "You gave him a place to hide. That's enough." For a long moment, the sound of the neon sign outside was the only noise, the faint buzz of light over fear. Finally, Clara said, "You don't care about justice, Daniel. You care about control." Just like he said. Daniel's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes, something that looked almost like regret. "You think you know him. You don't. The Alexander Vale I knew would burn the world to save himself." Her voice trembled, but she didn't back down. "And maybe the one I know would burn it to save someone else." He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "When they find him, and they will, remember I tried to help you." He turned and walked out into the night, leaving muddy footprints across the floor. Clara stood there for a long time, staring at the empty doorway, heart pounding so loud she could hear it. Then she picked up the phone and dialed the only number she had for Alexander, the one that had called her just hours ago. Voicemail. She tried again. And again. Nothing. By morning, the story broke on every major network. Alexander Vale missing. Arrest warrant issued. The world wanted his downfall. The internet swarmed with judgment. Headlines painted him as the villain. And Clara became the side character in every cruel version of the story. By noon, she couldn't take it anymore. She closed the diner early, ignoring the curious looks from her co-workers, and drove straight to the last place she knew he might go, the old pier by the water. When she arrived, fog covered everything. The waves were quiet, like the sea was holding its breath. Then she saw him standing at the edge, coat-drenched, phone in hand, staring into the horizon like a man standing between two worlds. "Alexander," she called out. He turned slowly, and for a moment she saw the same warmth in his eyes that had drawn her in. Then she saw the exhaustion behind it. "You shouldn't be here," he said. She walked closer. "You called me. You needed me." "I shouldn't have," he said. "They're watching everything, listening. If they know I talked to you, let them," she interrupted. "I'm not leaving you again." He looked at her, the wind whipping his hair, his voice cracking. "You don't understand. They're not just after me. Daniel, Victoria, the board, they framed it all. They made me the scapegoat, and now they'll come after anyone who believes me. Then we fight them," she said. He shook his head. "You can't fight men who own the truth." Clara reached for his hand. "Then we tell it louder." He closed his eyes, the rain finally beginning to fall, mixing with the salt of the ocean. "You don't know what you're risking." She smiled faintly. "I risked more when I let you walk away." The sound of an engine broke the moment, tires grinding against gravel. Headlights cut through the fog again, and this time several black cars pulled up along the pier. Alexander's body went rigid. "They found me." Men in suits stepped out, umbrellas in hand, moving with the precision of people who didn't come to negotiate. At the center of them stood Daniel, dry, composed, and colder than the rain. "It's over, Alexander," he said. "Don't make this harder." Clara stepped in front of him instinctively. "You can't just take him." Daniel's voice was soft, almost sympathetic. "He's already taken everything from himself." The agents closed in. Alexander's eyes darted to Clara. "Trust me," he whispered, and before she could speak, he slipped something into her hand, a small flash drive. hidden in his palm. "Don't lose it," he murmured. "It's the truth." Then the agents reached him. He didn't resist. They led him toward the cars, the rain falling harder now, blurring everything. The shouts, the flashes of light, the sound of doors closing. Clara stood alone on the pier, the waves crashing below, her hand clenched around the small metal drive that could destroy everything. And somewhere in the distance, as the cars disappeared into the fog, she whispered his name into the rain, not as a plea but as a promise. The next day, the world believed Alexander Vale was gone for good. Every network, every paper, every online feed repeated the same story. The fall of a billionaire, the collapse of an empire, the justice the powerful finally deserved. But Clara knew better. She'd seen the look in his eyes before they took him away. He wasn't defeated. He was protecting something. The flash drive he'd given her felt heavier than gold. She kept it hidden inside a tin box beneath her bed, afraid to look, but even more afraid not to. Each night she'd hear his voice in her mind, "Don't lose it." It's the truth. By the third day, men started showing up near the diner. Expensive suits pretending to be customers, cars that idled too long in the parking lot. Clara kept her head down, pretended not to notice. But every movement became deliberate, every word careful. That evening, when the diner closed, she locked the doors and pulled the flash drive from its hiding place. Her laptop flickered to life on the counter. She hesitated for a long time before inserting it. Inside were folders, hundreds of them, filled with documents, transactions, recordings, and internal memos from Vale Holdings. She scrolled through until she saw a video file named Board Meeting 1108. She clicked. The grainy footage showed a private conference room. Alexander sat at the end of the table, Daniel on his right, Victoria across from him. They were arguing. "You're moving money through shell accounts," Alexander said. "Overseas transfers under charitable fronts. Do you think I wouldn't notice?" Daniel leaned forward, voice low. "You're too sentimental for this world, Alexander. You want to save everyone, but that's not how business works." "I built this company to create something that mattered," Alexander said. Victoria's tone was ice. "You built a brand, not a charity. You were useful because you looked like integrity. Now you're a liability." Alexander stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. "If this ever gets out," Daniel smiled faintly. "It won't. You're going to take the blame before that happens." The video cut off. Clara sat frozen, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. The truth was worse than she'd imagined. Alexander hadn't lost control. They'd stolen it. She grabbed her phone and dialed his number again. Straight to voicemail. "Alexander, I saw the files," she whispered into the phone. "I know what they did to you. I'm not going to let them win. Just hold on." The next morning she drove to the city. The diner, her mother, the safety of anonymity. She left it all behind. Her only thought was to find someone who would listen. But when she arrived at Vale Tower, the building that once carried his name in gold letters, she found security thicker than ever. A guard stepped forward. "Ma'am, this property is restricted." She lifted her chin. "I'm here about Alexander Vale." The guard's expression didn't change. "Mr. Vale no longer represents this company. But I have evidence." "Then take it to the authorities," he interrupted, motioning toward the exit. She turned to leave, but a voice stopped her. "Miss Evans?" She turned back. Victoria stood there, immaculate as always, flanked by two executives. "I thought I recognized you," Victoria said smoothly. "The famous waitress who changed the billionaire's heart." Clara met her gaze without flinching. "You framed him," Victoria smiled. He framed himself. He was careless enough to fall in love with a story. Clara took a step closer. "You can bury the truth for a while, but it always finds air." Victoria's eyes flicked to the small bulge in Clara's jacket pocket. "Be careful what you carry around, dear. Sometimes truth gets people killed." Clara turned and walked away, her pulse racing. She didn't look back, but she could feel Victoria's gaze following her all the way to the door. That night she checked into a cheap hotel on the outskirts of the city. Sleep was impossible. Every sound, footsteps in the hall, the hum of a car outside, made her sit upright. She plugged in her laptop again, staring at the folders. She knew what she had to do. The next morning, she drove to the only person who might still believe in Alexander, the investigative journalist whose byline had first broken the story of his downfall. Elliot Grayson. He opened the door cautiously when she arrived. "Miss Evans?" She nodded. "You exposed Alexander Vale." His brow furrowed. "If you're here to yell at me, you're 3 days late." "I'm here to show you something," she said, pulling out the flash drive. "But if I do, you have to promise you'll tell the truth about all of it." He hesitated, then motioned her inside. For hours they reviewed every file, every recording. By the end, Elliot's face was pale. "My God," he whispered. "This isn't just corruption. It's conspiracy. They made him their scapegoat," she said, "and now he's paying for their crimes." He sat back, running a hand through his hair. "If I publish this, they'll come for me." "For both of us." Clara met his eyes. "They already have." He nodded slowly. "Then we do it carefully. I'll need a copy of everything. If what's here is real and it could destroy them." She handed him the drive, her heart pounding. "It is real." As she left his apartment that night, the city lights glimmered like 1,000 unspoken promises. For the first time since Alexander had been taken, she felt hope. But as she crossed the street toward her car, headlights flared too close. A black sedan screeched to a stop beside her. The window rolled down. Victoria's voice, cold and smooth, slipped through the rain. "I told you, Clara. Truth has consequences." And before she could react, someone stepped out from the back seat. Alexander. His face was bruised, his eyes haunted, but alive. "Get in the car," he said softly. Clara froze. "Alexander?" "Please," he whispered. "You're in danger." She hesitated for only a heartbeat, then stepped into the car. The door shut. The city lights vanished behind tinted glass, and in the silence that followed, she couldn't tell whether she'd just been saved or captured. The car sped through the wet streets, the city lights streaking like fire across the windows. Clara sat rigid beside Alexander, her heart pounding with confusion and relief in equal measure. He was alive, but not the same. The calm steadiness she'd known in him was gone, replaced by a quiet urgency that made her chest tighten. She turned to him. "Where are we going?" He didn't answer at first, eyes locked on the road ahead. Rain hit the windshield in rhythmic sheets, each drop catching light like shards of glass. Finally, he said, "Somewhere they can't find us." "They?" she pressed. "Daniel? Victoria? What's happening?" He glanced at her, his jaw tight. "You shouldn't have gone to Vale Tower. They were waiting for you." Her stomach sank. "You knew?" "I heard," he said. "Someone inside warned me." He hesitated, voice dropping. "You're lucky you made it out." She leaned closer, desperate for clarity. "Then tell me the truth, Alexander. All of it. What are they after?" He exhaled slowly, like a man standing on the edge of confession. "When I took over the company, I thought I was fixing my father's mistakes. But he never built a company. He built a system. One that thrived on lies, on favors, on people who could be bought and discarded. Daniel was supposed to help me clean it up. Instead, he made it worse. He used my name to move money, to silence journalists, to buy politicians. And when I found out, they made you the villain," Clara finished softly. He nodded. "And now they need me erased to keep it that way." The car turned off the main road, heading toward the industrial edge of the city. Warehouses, train tracks, the kind of forgotten streets that smelled of rust and rain. Clara gripped the seat. "Who's driving?" The man in front didn't turn. His posture was stiff, professional. "He's with me," Alexander said quickly. "Someone I trust," but something about the driver felt wrong. He hadn't spoken once. As they passed under a flickering streetlight, Clara saw his reflection in the rearview mirror. Sharp eyes, no warmth. Her pulse quickened. "Alexander." He followed her gaze and his expression changed. "Stop the car," he said quietly. The driver didn't respond. "I said stop the car." Still nothing. In one swift motion, Alexander grabbed the wheel. The car swerved violently, tires shrieking against the wet road. Clara screamed as the vehicle spun, skidding sideways until it slammed into a barricade and came to a shuddering stop. The driver was thrown forward, dazed. Alexander reached for Clara. "Run!" They stumbled out into the rain-soaked night, sprinting down a narrow alley. Behind them, the car door opened, the sound of footsteps quick and heavy. They darted between the buildings, the smell of metal and oil thick in the air. Alexander pulled her toward a half-open warehouse door and pushed her inside. The space was cavernous and dim, filled with the echo of dripping water. Clara leaned against a wall, trying to catch her breath. Who was he? Alexander's face was grim. Daniel's man. I should have known. She grabbed his arm. Then we can't stay here. He nodded, pacing. There's a freight line that runs through here. If we can reach it. But the creak of footsteps above them stopped him. Someone was already inside. Alexander Vale, a voice called out, smooth and echoing. You really should have stayed gone, Daniel. He descended the metal stairs, gun in hand, his coat drenched. Behind him, 2 more men flanked the shadows. Clara stepped in front of Alexander instinctively. You don't have to do this, she said. Daniel smiled thinly. You still think this is about choice? His eyes flicked to Alexander. You stole something that doesn't belong to you. Alexander's jaw tightened. You mean the truth? Daniel's voice hardened. The board has already erased you. The world believes the story I gave them, but the files, the ones you left behind, those could ruin everything. So I'll ask once, where are they? Clara's heart raced. The flash drive, she'd given it to the journalist. Alexander met her eyes briefly. Somewhere you'll never reach. Daniel sighed, almost disappointed. You always were sentimental. He lifted the gun. In that split second, Clara moved. She shoved Alexander sideways just as the shot cracked through the warehouse. The bullet hit a steel beam, the sound deafening. Alexander ducked, grabbing a fallen metal rod and swinging it hard, knocking Daniel's gun to the ground. The men behind him rushed forward, chaos erupting in the dark. Alexander fought with a desperate strength Clara had never seen. Not elegant, not calculated, just raw survival. She grabbed a loose chain from the wall and swung it toward one of the attackers, striking his shoulder. Clara, go! Alexander shouted. I'm not leaving you! Another gunshot split the air. This one hit closer, tearing through a crate near her feet. Daniel snarled, his voice echoing through the rain and thunder. You can't save him, Clara. He'll destroy you like he destroys everything. She turned toward him, trembling but defiant. He didn't destroy me. He saved me. In the confusion, Alexander lunged, tackling Daniel to the ground. The gun skidded across the wet concrete. Both men struggled, fists landing hard, years of betrayal condensed into every blow. Then, with a flash of light from outside, another figure appeared in the doorway. Victoria! Stop! She shouted, stepping forward. Enough! Her voice was sharp, but her expression was different, torn, shaken. Daniel, put the gun down. Daniel froze for a moment, panting, bleeding from his lip. You shouldn't be here, Victoria's voice cracked. I should have been here years ago. You said we were saving the company, but all we've done is destroy it. He stared at her like he didn't recognize her. You think you're any better? She looked at Alexander, rain dripping from her hair. He was right, she said softly. We became everything we swore we'd never be. Daniel's hand tightened around the gun again, but this time Victoria moved first. She stepped between them, her voice breaking. Then let it end here. For one suspended second, no one moved. The sound of rain on the metal roof filled the silence. Then a single shot rang out. Clara screamed. Daniel dropped to his knees, the gun falling from his hand. Victoria stood frozen, smoke curling from the weapon still in hers. He looked up at her, disbelief in his eyes. You wouldn't... But she had. He fell forward, motionless. The rain poured harder, washing away the last traces of what was left between them. Victoria lowered the gun, her hands shaking. It's over. Alexander stared at her, breath ragged. You didn't have to... She cut him off, tears mixing with the rain. I did. Because I'm tired of living without a soul. Then she turned and walked out into the storm, disappearing into the night like someone who knew she wouldn't return. Clara reached for Alexander, her voice trembling. It's over, she whispered. You're free, but his expression said otherwise. No, he said quietly. Not yet. He glanced toward Daniel's fallen body. They'll come for what's left of this story. And if we don't tell it first, they'll twist it again. He looked at Clara, soaked, shaking, but still standing beside him, and there was a kind of resolve in his eyes she'd never seen before. This time, he said softly, we tell the truth ourselves. The storm had passed, but the city didn't feel calm. It felt suspended, waiting. By dawn, the warehouse was empty except for Clara and Alexander. The sound of dripping water echoed around them, the scent of gunpowder still faint in the air. They hadn't spoken much after Victoria disappeared into the night. There were no words big enough for what had happened, or for what was coming next. Alexander stood by the open doorway, the first light of morning cutting across his face. He looked exhausted but clear, as if something inside him had finally settled. "They'll come soon," Clara said quietly. "Police, reporters, everyone," he nodded. "I know. What are you going to do?" He looked at her. The woman who'd seen him when no one else did. The one person who still believed there was something left in him worth saving. "I'm going to stop hiding." She stepped closer, the morning air cold between them. "You mean, tell them everything?" "Yes," he said. "All of it. Daniel, Victoria, my father, the lies, the money, the cover-ups. If they destroy me for it, then at least I'll go down for telling the truth." Clara's voice trembled. "They might arrest you again." He smiled faintly. "Then I'll face it." "I'm not that man anymore." She reached up, touching his cheek. "You were never the man they said you were." For the first time, he believed it. Later that day, the story broke, not from the tabloids, not from corporate leaks, but from Elliot Grayson's newsroom. The files Clara had given him, the recordings, the transcripts, all published. Every line of corruption exposed. Every lie laid bare. The world didn't know what to make of it at first. Some called it redemption, others called it betrayal. But the truth was out, and it was undeniable. When the authorities arrived at the warehouse, Alexander didn't resist. He walked out with his head high, rain-soaked and unguarded, the image of a man finally at peace with the cost of honesty. Cameras flashed like lightning. Someone shouted, "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" He paused. "Yes, tell them love is what made me remember who I was." Months passed. Trials, hearings, investigations. The world dissected every detail, but one truth held firm. The evidence proved Alexander was framed. He wasn't innocent of everything, but he was guilty of trying to fix a world that punished goodness. He was released quietly, without spectacle. No fortune, no title, no mansion. But when he stepped out of the courthouse, Clara was there waiting. She'd traded her apron for a simple blue dress, her hair down, eyes full of the same calm that had once disarmed him in that hospital cafeteria. He walked to her slowly. "You should have moved on." She smiled. "I did. I just moved toward you." For a long time they stood in silence as the city moved around them. Cars, people, noise. None of it mattered. "What now?" she asked softly. He looked around, then back at her. "I don't have an empire anymore." "Then we'll build something better," she said. "Something honest." Weeks later, they opened a small cafe on the edge of Millbridge. Nothing fancy. White curtains, old wooden chairs, a handwritten sign that read Second Chances Cafe. The locals came out of curiosity, then stayed because the place felt like peace. Alexander worked behind the counter, learning how to live quietly, how to laugh without thinking about who might be watching. Clara ran the books, always teasing him about his terrible handwriting. Sometimes people recognized him, whispered that he used to be a billionaire, that he'd fallen from grace. But he never corrected them, because he hadn't fallen. He'd simply landed somewhere real. One evening, as the sun dipped low, he watched Clara wiping down tables. Her movement slow, content, steady. "You know," he said, "the day I lost my memory, I thought it was the worst thing that could happen to me." She looked up. "And now," he smiled, "now I think it saved me." She walked over, standing close enough that he could see the faint reflection of the sunset in her eyes. "No," she said softly, "you saved yourself. You just needed someone to remind you who you were." He reached for her hand, the warmth of her fingers grounding him in the kind of truth he'd once thought money could buy. Outside, a breeze moved through the open door, carrying the sound of laughter from the street. He looked at her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for not giving up on me," Clara smiled. "That's what love does, Alexander. It keeps believing, even when the world doesn't." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers, and for a moment, everything stilled. No past, no guilt, no fear. Just two souls who had survived the storm together. As the cafe lights flickered on, their small world glowed with golden warmth, the kind that wealth could never buy, and power could never destroy. Subscribe to be part of stories that still believe in love, the kind that rebuilds what the world breaks.